What's up, everybody? We're back with another episode of the Dragzine Podcast. I'm your host, Senior Associate Editor Brian Wagner, and this week on the show, we have the man that really doesn't need an introduction, John Force. John, what's going on, man?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me on your show. I'm down here in Yorba Linda in our museum here with some of my cars that I race, the Chevrolets and Robert's Auto Club and my girls' cars, but excited to be on your show. And he was out at the race with us, right, Sarah? Okay, so that was good. You know what we're all about, so hit it. This is your show.
Yeah, man, it was cool to actually be back at the track. It's my first big show race I got to shoot in a while. But before we get into the questions, there's one thing that I wanted to mention that, it kind of caught my attention as being a media fly on the wall person. I knew where you were at on the track at all times. Do you know how?
How you knew where I was at?
Because every time you rode by on your scooter, the crowd went nuts.
Oh, I thought you had a beeper on me.
No,
okay.
no. Not allowed to do that anymore.
I thought you were following me. Yeah, the fans are what it's all about. They're the ones that motivate you. And since I played high school football, the camaraderie of a team, being with the guys, and now with the gals that we race against, Joria and other women, and my own daughters. But it was always the crowd. Wasn't about the money. It wasn't about doing a long burnout. That was what it was all about. And those days have kind of changed. Cars are very exotic now. But just being part of it, when you're down, I would tell Brittany, when you have a day when you lose and you're feeling really down, go out to the crowd because they'll love you. They'll take care of you. I got a light blinking up here. You see it? Go ahead.
Oh,
I got lights blinking, trying to tell me something.
Oh, we just roll with it here, man. We're a one take Tommy kind of show. It's, whatever happens. That's what makes it fun. Now, I was doing a little bit of digging. I'm a lifelong fan, and I found a video where it talked about your trip to Surfer's Paradise in Australia. Gary Densham was doing it on one of Competition Plus's videos early in your career. That seemed like it was a pretty eventful experience, and I don't know if a lot of people know about it. Why don't you kind of tell some of your stories from your trip to the land down under with a nitro funny car?
Well, I told you I've been on fire from here to Australia, but there was things, it was another world. I mean, I'd never really been out of California. I'd been to Arizona. I've been to Oregon and Washington because my dad was a truck driver and a logger. So I've been around, but never, to get on an airplane, a jet. I'd never flown in an airplane before. 1974, I was out of high school in 67. I was racing and I got my first fuel funny car. It was called Brute Force. And that was a name given to me by Gene Beaver, my uncle. They raced funny cars and dragsters in the early days, and the Condit brothers. But I'd never even been on an airplane. So to go to Australia, that was quite an experience. And I had a crew chief. We called him Shooter Doug. You can imagine why. Shooter. Okay. His tune-up was in the toolbox, but he was good. He got me there and got me back alive. And my best friend from high school, Bruce Thorson, he's a traffic control pilot operator. He went with us to do bottom end. I mean, I didn't have any help in those days, and we survived it. But it was another world. I was 20. I think I turned 24 when I went there, and it was well, I shouldn't even say my age. It was 74, and it turned the winter of 75. But it wasn't winter down there in Australia. It was summer. And we ran the Ample Series. And it was, look, I could go on about this forever because I never talk about it. But it was quite an experience, how that whole thing went. Go ahead, I'll get back to you, but I'll get back to some more stuff.
Oh, no. Keep telling the story, man. I want to hear about this wildness because I could only imagine.
Well, Gary Densham went. He's a good friend of mine. He even drove for me for a number of years, and he's still driving funny cars, and now his boy's out there driving. So it's a family sport in HRA, what we do. We love it. And our kids, my granddaughter, my grandson, my two grandsons, Jacob and Noah, are driving junior dragsters, and Autumn is driving junior dragster. That's Robert and Adra's son. So along the way, racing is a family, and Gary Densham became family to me over all those years. But how we survived it, I don't know. with a lot of help from Gary Densham. I'll make that clear.
Yeah, that's kind of what in the interview Gary talked about. You guys were trying to figure stuff out, and it went. And I could only imagine back in that day with that, the early, the back in that day with Nitro, it was a whole different world and experience, especially in another country.
Well, understand something. I had just got my license here in the States. I hadn't even run a race. And they wanted me because in Australia, they're 20 years behind us, I guess, or 10, and they just believe everybody from America is a cowboy. So we all got on cowboy hats. I've always wore cowboy boots. I never rode a horse, but jackets. I was sponsored by a truck driving school, Wally Thor School of Trucking, and we were in black and silver and red, and it was just a look that we had to get down there, and didn't have a clue what I was doing with a race car. And the first day in town, to give you an example, I don't want to go on. I could go on for an hour, but they said, "Could you do a burnout?" And I said, "Sure, I can do a burnout." And where do we do it? They didn't mean at the track. We drug it downtown in Surfer's Paradise and did a burnout with it, which you wouldn't think of that in these days. Be a good way to kill yourself, or at least that's how I remember it. Maybe I hit my head and I'm getting my story wrong, but I remember how the people reacted to it. It was unbelievable. Look at what these guys do. And then the first night at the Ample Series, but the media loved me because I was a talker, okay? And I'd give them stories and all this stuff. But what was really cool about it is on the very first run, I did the burnout, okay? And I couldn't get the car in reverse, so they shut me off in Gary's single. 3 runs, 3 runs. Second run, I got out there and got over to the right. Like I'm still learning how to drive. Got over to the right because they didn't have guardrails like we have now and stuff. People sat on grass lawns and stuff. And I got over to the right, had to shut it off again. And the promoter come over and said, "You come here in front of a packed house." There's a lot of people, Surfer's Paradise. And I remember in the hotel, they didn't have refrigeration. I'd never had a beer ever in my life. I was a Coca-Cola drinker and a milk drinker, but everything, they give you what they call an ice box that's got a chunk of ice in it. And that's where you can't keep milk cold like that. And so I'm going to get wore out on this one story. So in the middle of it, I learned how to drink hot beer, and boy, I drank for the next 40 years. So anyway, the point is, on the last run, Densham said, "You got to go down this racetrack. We got to give them one run side by side." And old Shooter Doug, he says, "I got this thing ready." And what I didn't know is at the end of the track, cars had never run, okay, as fast as we had run. I ran like 201 miles an hour. Nobody had ever run that. Well, they opened the gates at the end of the track that went out into a cow pasture. How'd you like to hit a cow?
Oh.
So I blazed down through there. This ain't what you wanted. Am I going the wrong direction?
Oh.
I blazed down through there, and my car went for some unknown reason to the other end. It was a high gear car. That's one reason. Densham had 2 speeds. Everybody was evolving into that. And my car didn't smoke the tires. It went down through there and it blew up and it caught on fire. Now here I am. I don't have a clue what to do. I'm on the fire bottles. I go through this fence at the end of the track, and the next thing I know, fire goes out. I'm sitting out there in the dark. I don't know where you're at. And then I see 2 eyes. And I thought, man, that could be, these are real stories. I did not make these up. I lived it. And I saw these 2 eyes and I thought, man, I'm in Australia. What is that, an alien? And what it was a cow. A cow had come over and just was, he was back 20, 30 feet, but he was just like, what is this? And they got me out, and the promoter come down and yelled, "You're finished. I ain't even going to fly you home. You got to swim back. You're terrible." And all this. And the next day there was a guy called Stomper, looked like he's from the Outback, had a hair this big, and he was beating on my door. And when they're like, "How are we going to get home? What are we going to do?" And this guy holds up the Sydney newspaper. "You are the quickest man ever in Australia." And so the promoter Ron Harding was his name. He had to keep me. He couldn't fire me. because we had set the speed record. And I tell the story sometimes. I say it was the ET record, but it wasn't ET, it was speed. And I think it was that high gear car. And we ran the rest of the tour, and Gary Densham babysitted me, loaned me parts, fixed my parts, but it was the greatest time of my life.
I can only imagine that entire.
That's the short version. You want the long version?
I can only imagine that entire scene unfolding. That's like just out of the Back to the Future scene when he lands in the barn and the cows are just like, what's going on? And there's this wild man from America popping out of a burning car, and he's like, hey, what's up, John Force? Nice to meet you.
That's what happened. That's my story, and I'm sticking to it.
Speaking of stories, there is a gentleman, the late great Steve Evans was the receiver of a lot of your stories. You had an amazing rapport with him. And I remember growing up watching you and, craving those interviews, some of the most memorable interviews that I think in all motorsports. What are some cool, Steve Evans related stories you might have that people would love to hear that, you've never really told before?
But get to Steve Evans. I love him. He was a personal friend of mine. He taught me a lot about how to interview. I used to sit with him and he'd tell me what you need to say, where you need to go. I just a dumb truck driver, loving this whole thing, being part of it. But I wanted to tell you, we went to Adelaide, all the way across to the Outback, and to race there. And they flew us, and then they trucked us back. I got to go across the real Australia that you don't see in Sydney or Surfer's Paradise. I actually seen a guy running down the road, and I said, let's stop. Let's talk to him. Look at this guy. I never saw an alligator until I went to Florida. And you know what I mean? You just don't think they're real. I saw it on a golf course, it scared me to death. And there's just things you just don't imagine. And so you see a guy running with a spear, and I'm thinking, nah, they're filming something out here. Nope, that was a real Outback guy, or running with a spear. He was really running down the road. And we got out there in a monsoon or whatever it was. They put us into a hotel, and the guy came upstairs. This hotel looked like an old cowboy movie, and I went upstairs. And I went to close the window because it was raining. They go, don't close the window. I said, well, why not? I'm talking about a hotel, but it ain't a hotel like you're thinking. It's a stone, sand, and gravel hotel, right? And I said, well, I want to close the windows. It's raining. The guy said, no, you close the windows. The snakes can't get out. Are you kidding me? And he wasn't joking, because the snakes go upstairs to get out of the rain. Like, now I ain't talking about big deadly snakes, but I ain't saying there might have been some go through there. And that was that world that we lived in. I saw in Barrier Reef a great white shark that could swallow a well, I won't say Volkswagen. When I was with Ford, I used to say a Fiesta. I'm with Chevy now, so one of their smaller versions. Yeah, but there really is a Jaws out there. So that was the world I lived in. And don't let me forget to tell you about the plane ride. I love talking about this because I talk about all this other stuff I do, and this was my roots. But let me tell you about the flight home at the end of this interview. Next question. Okay, you doing okay there, Brian?
I'm doing great. This is just amazing.
Okay, so here we are. This all be in my movie, and it's all in my book, but I don't know if they'll ever get it done. I keep coming back and winning, and I keep crashing, and there's another story, and it keeps getting longer and longer. But well, what are we talking about, sir? I just got lost.
Steve Evans.
No, not plane crash. What?
Steve Evans.
Steve Evans. Steve Evans was a real guy. He knew how to take you when you did good, when you did bad. He knew the road to take you down. I mean, he was the early days of what we did. But Steve Evans got me one time, and Al Hoffman was accusing me. John Force has magic. He goes down a racetrack and nobody can get down it, and he runs low ET, and it's impossible. He's got a traction control device. And Hoffman even went to Steve Plugers that built my chassis in the early day and was my first real crew chief. He went to him to see if there was a place mounted where we could mount a traction control. There wasn't any. So then we're at Phoenix, and I make a run and I set a record, and I get out of the car, and Steve Evans goes, I got to ask you this. Here it is. They've all complained about you. You know, you got magic. And he said, there's a traction control on your car. I said, they've already been to Plugers. There is no traction control. He goes, no, they say you're wearing it on your fire suit. And I was so mad. I ripped my fire suit open and dropped it. And I didn't mean to. It went to the ground. And there I was in my underwear with my skivvies on. And everyone was in shock. And I didn't even realize I did it. And that picture went everywhere. I got it in my museum. I hid it upstairs. And Evan says, oh my God, you know, this is an X-rated show here. And, but that was one of the things that he turned it into a funny story, and he fixed the bad situation I got into.
Yeah, I could only imagine, like, from his perspective, you know, because I remember growing up watching you on TV, and it was like, we knew when you were going to be in front of the mic, it was going to be epic. And from my own experience doing live interviews with racers, I learned really fast that it's like working with a child and an animal all at the same time, because you don't know what's going to happen. You just stick the mic out there and hope for the best. So I'm sure he had a healthy respect for what was about to come out of your mouth.
Well, if you took something the wrong direction, or you told a story completely wrong, you know what I mean? He knew how to fix it. He was great for TV. He was great for my career.
Yeah, it was just the way that he conveyed himself really told the stories, and you could tell that he enjoyed being around you guys.
He loved it. He loved the sport. You know, he was a talker too. You could get in a bar with him, and he'd tell you stories. You know, he was older than me. You know, that was 40 years ago. 20, well, at least 35 years ago with Steve Evans. He's passed away, but unbelievable individual. And he made the Don Perdomes, the Gartleses, the Shirleys, John Force. He made us all superstars just by the way he handled it and made it and got the crowd up. And there's so many things from your media people like Sarah that take us down a road and get us out of trouble or get us in trouble and do whatever that we got to do. They build it. And that's why I want to be on your show, Brian, because you're building my name at 100 years old. You're doing a pretty good job. But you're not 100. I'm 100.
Now, kind of going off of that, you know, you were part of the sport when showmanship was still a big deal. You know, dry hops, long burnouts. You know, there was a certain fanfare to it. A lot of that just kind of had to go away due to the name of performance progress. But do you think the sport needs to kind of bring some of that entertainment back in this day and age of multiple distraction devices in people's pockets? Does the sport need more pop like that, John?
It does. And the fans asked me, can you do a long burnout? I won the championship a few years back. And on my last run, I knew I had it locked up, and I just did a burnout. I was racing Jack Beckman at Pomona. I did a burnout almost to the lights, and I backed up. And my crew chief was on the radio, and he goes, okay, you're going to be out of gas by half track. You better get off the gas. And I knew I'd sacrificed winning a race, something I shouldn't have done, but I did it because I wanted to give the fans a show for winning that title. And that might not have been 4 years ago. And I think the last time I won was in 15 or something, but it was back years back. But yeah, you know, I used to do a burnout, and if you couldn't get it in reverse, now you idle it off or you shut it off. And in those days, you used to whack the throttle. You had to stay in your lane, but you could turn the car around and drive it back to the start line. Oh, we did stuff that was, and I wasn't the guy that created it. It was all the other stars that did that stuff that made it great.
Yeah, to me, it's like watching some of the old footage. It's amazing to see how far the sport has come, and the showmanship, I think, definitely made it, but we've had to trade some of that off for the performance. And I'd rather see big smoky burnouts, dry hops, and, you know, throttle wax, because to me, that's what I grew up on, but that's just me being nostalgic, I guess.
But sponsors like Peak and Chevrolet, Monster, Montana brand, Cornwell Tools, Peak, they want you to win. And if you did and go back to that, now if we're at a match race, a lot of times we'll do it. If I was to get a single in a final round, you know, where I didn't need a lane choice, I might do a longer burnout, but you can't run it out of gas and kill yourself, because these things will hurt you. They're dangerous, but they're very exotic. They're all a lot of computers on board, a lot of stuff that are on timers with with the engine and stuff. You can't overheat the clutch. You can't overheat the tires or the motor. The list goes on and on. Did we love it? So you gave up some of the dry hops and the long burnouts for an ET and 330 miles an hour.
Now, I will say that I didn't realize Alexa still did throttle wax, and I was in her pit shooting some pictures at Norwalk, and she did a throttle whack, and I about jumped out of my skin because I was not ready for it. Fun
Well,
though.
they whack the throttles and they hold the brake. That's how they seat the clutch.
Yeah.
Okay, that we all did it in the old days. Now most people don't anymore. They don't want any heat in the clutch. But yeah, it has changed. The whole sport has changed. The cars all used to be Don the Snake Perdome, Tom the Mongoose, the Blue Max, you know, Big Daddy Don Garlits. It's changed. Corporate America took over. They put in the money. Now you see all these brand names and of sponsors, and we got to deliver for them and take care of the fans.
Speaking of delivering of sponsors, I've got to do one of my sponsor ad reads right here. It's for Flowmaster. Whether you'd like to ride and rumble down the road or roar down the racetrack, Flowmaster has the perfect exhaust system for you. With direct fit options for classic and late model cars, trucks, and SUVs to race-oriented high flow, high performance systems and fabrication, ready tubes, flanges, and exhaust components ready to weld, Flowmaster has you covered. Got to hit those sponsors, right, John?
You done good. I missed Flavor Pack. I'll throw it in there. Did you miss any? Come on, Brian.
Didn't miss. I just have one read. I got a bunch at the end. I got my cheat sheet. Got to do that. You know, too many shots to the head. But you know, you've worked with some of the greatest minds in nitro racing. You know, what was it like racing and winning with these different crew chiefs? You know, what they bring to the table. You know, like someone like an Austin Coil or these other guys. You know, you've worked with the legends.
Well, I can take credit, you know, for winning 16 championships and now 153 wins. But probably the guy that was instrumental in all of that. Yeah, Steve Pluger ran my car in the early days, was a chassis builder. I had a number of crew chiefs, but Austin Coil, when he stepped in, and then his partner, Bernie Federley, that joined us, you know, we won 10 championships straight. We won in 90, 91, lost to Cruz. I call it the hamburger stand from hell. He drove for McDonald's, lost him, and I come back and won 93 straight out and 10 straight. And it was Austin Coil that I give the credit. But I won with Jimmy Prock that tunes Robert's Auto Club Chevrolet now. Mike Neff, the list goes on and on, but Coil was the one that did most of the winning.
And that's like the legit, I think, like the duo that sticks out of my mind. It was, you know, always listening to you, you know, crediting Coil after a run. What did Austin Coil have as a crew chief that just made him magical?
Well, one, he was very talented. He worked in a car dealership and before he built the Chi-Town Hustler in Chicago, and he just understood cars. But he was also a genius. Okay, I mean a genius. This guy could build. If I had to build a rocket to the moon, he's the guy I'd hire. If I could afford to build a rocket to the moon. But Coil just understood everything. But he was also very truthful. I'm a bull jiver, storyteller. Everything he said was gospel. And when Coil, I'd say to him, "Is this thing going to run?" And he'd go, "We got to beat this guy." He said, "Well, what would you like me to do? Step on the gas and make it smoke the tires? We can only do what we can do." Or he'd say, "Hey, on the burnout," he'd say, "at 300 feet, set off the fire bottles because this thing's going to be on fire. It don't sound right." He was very honest, and he deserves all that credit for all those championships.
And kind of going, you know, off of that, you know, to look back on it now, what, you know, it's unheard of to win that many championships in a row. You know, you living in the moment, you don't realize what's really happening. I guess looking back on it now, what was it like to kind of just run roughshod over an entire sport for a decade?
Yeah, but I don't look at it that way. I love the sport. It's been good to me. It's made me, it sent my kids to college. It gave them a chance to race, give my wife and I a great lifestyle. I'm still trying to hold it together right now to keep this thing going. I don't have any personal wealth. I'm just a guy that races cars, and without sponsors, I'm nothing. So I've got to keep pitching them, taking care of the fans, and winning races. But what was the question? I hit my head. What was the question?
Well, talk about what it was like winning those 10 years worth of championships, with someone like Austin Coil. Now that you can look back on it, what was that kind of like?
Yeah, but when I first got in a race car, I just wanted to do a burnout. I wanted to get my picture taken next to Don the Snake Perdome. You know what I mean? That's where it came from. In the early days, I was with Gartlett's, um, uh, Shirley, Don Perdome, the Mongoose, Beetle, Jungle Jim Lieberman. I mean, Al Segrini. I was out there with these people, and they didn't even know who I was. I just a guy. I drove my own crew cab and chaparral, and then I went on to Featherlights and 18 wheelers. And along the road, I just wanted to be part of that and have the respect. And then when I started winning, I was just lucky. They said you can win 3 championships. A lot of people have. Perdome won 4, but to go on and win 16. And I just never really looked at that. I just kept going on doing it because I love driving a fuel funny car. I love the fans. I love the cheer of the crowd. I got that helmet on. I got a team around me. And then my kids got into it. And Robert Height, my son-in-law, like I said, drives the Auto Club Chevrolet. He's president of our company. All of this was just what it was. And it was just surrounding myself with great people that lived it. And Austin Coil, like I said, was a genius. Bernie Federley came in. They backed up each other. They were both geniuses. I was a dumb one. But down the road, I found the money. And you've got to have the money to hire the team, to buy the parts, to go on tour. That's what you got to have. And I was able to tell stories in a boardroom, get somebody to give me money. And it was starvation. I never won a race for the first 10 or 12 years. Brittany comes out in a pro car and wins 3 years in a championship with Monster Energy. And now she drives for Monster and Flavor Pack. So look, I don't know. Call me lucky. Call me what you want. But I got here because of the great people around me and the sponsors that supported me and the cheer of the crowd. That's simple.
And another thing I thought of too was that I saw on another video a device that Austin had come up with I think it was the dyno superchargers. Now, is that something that you just turn the mad genius loose and let him come up with whatever he needed to give you guys that edge to win?
He built a dyno in our shop and nobody knew how he did it. And you think a dyno has a motor on it with fuel or gasoline in it that runs and it simulates the motor going. He built it without a motor. It was all electric. Had a clutch can on it like a race car. It had a blower up on top, an injector ran, all of that, but it was all electric. And I can't even imagine. I can't even turn on my TV sometimes. Coil was just a genius, and people later duplicated him. But it takes a very smart man to do what he did. And there's a lot of smart men in drag racing. It wasn't just Austin Coil. I was lucky, I believe, to get the best.
And as a driver, how much more confidence did that give you behind the wheel in a 10,000 horsepower fuel car to know that you had someone like that had the ability to tune it to such a fine degree?
But I also knew that he would protect me. He always built safety into the car. If it was hurt, he'd call on the radio, something's wrong, shut this thing off early. Coil was always, he cared about his driver. He cared about the team. You know what I mean? He was just Coil was just a real guy. And I wish I could have been more like him. You know what I mean? And just a very unique, and I got to say, I owe everything to him. I've never said that, but Austin Coil, I owe everything to you.
And that's a great way to kind of dovetail on this next question, because you talked about this earlier, how you surrounded yourself with great people, and you kind of helped pioneer the concept of these multi-car teams. That a game changer. What led you down that path to kind of come up with that? What was that process like?
I was sitting at Orange County Raceway when they had the nationals there. We did a lot of match racing there, and we're sitting me and Coil sitting in the car, and this guy, one of the crew chiefs that worked for Larry Minor, come running back, and they had 2 dragsters, and he stuck his head in the window and said, that worked. And Coil said something like, man, you really ran good. He said, well, we saw what the first dragster did. We knew we could step it up. And Coil looked at me and said, sure be nice to have 2 cars. And I went to work on it because you got a backup car. That was the concept of 2 cars. You had to find a sponsor. I found a young Hispanic kid. He's a TV broadcaster, Tony Petragon. Larry Miner really liked him. Larry Miner sold me a trailer on credit. I think I still owe him. But in the middle of it, Tony drove for us. Tony went on to win a championship. Then he went on to drive for another oil company and won championships. And now he's in the TV box and looks just like he did 25 years ago, never changed. The only one changed was me. So it was just a matter of a multi-car team. And then Gary Dincham come along and we got Gary to team up with us. He was an old buddy. And Gary won Indy. He won the Big Bud Shootout. We made the top 10 and we went down that road. So there was a 3-car team. But then my girls were growing up, Ashley, Brittany, Courtney, in Super Comp, A Fuel. And I knew I got to have more cars. And that was crazy of me because finding money in corporate America, it's tough. It was easier years ago, and you just got to keep fighting it to make it happen. So in the middle of it, that's how I got a 3rd team, and then I got a 4th team. And Montana brand, Frank Teague's billionaire out of Seattle, grows fruits and vegetables, has a ton of businesses. He sponsors Brittany's flavor pack with Monster, but he also was with Austin Proc in the Montana brand. But with the pandemic, because of aerospace and everything, we had to park it for a year. Proc's still working with me. In fact, last weekend, he was able to get in the Parts Plus car and help out Clay, and to put another car in the show. And so it all worked out to help everybody. I like keeping my employees with me, but the kid's a young kid and he had a right to go, so he went.
Speaking of Austin Proc, what an amazing driver. I watched him on Flow Racing this winter at the Chili Bowl, wheeling that midget around, beating and banging. And then, he jumps into a fuel car that he's, one that he's never driven before and starts winning rounds. I mean, that's some amazing stuff to have that kind of people around you.
He was looking, his dad works for us and his one brother did, but he went to NASCAR, and his other brother, Sam, works with us, but they're a racing family. I knew Jimmy when he was a kid. I sold his dad a TV in his house, but Austin, I thought he was going to head toward roundy cars and then he was going to end up in NASCAR. And then he ended up with us, a great driver, won his first race at Seattle a couple years ago, the first year in the seat of the car. So he'll be back. He'll be back with us. And if he don't end up with us, he'll end up somewhere because that's what he wants to do. He's a driver.
And you mentioned kind of having your daughters come on board and be a part of the team. What's that been like to be able to foster such an amazing, royal bloodline of racers that have, you see some people that they race off their family name and they never really do anything, but I think you guys got a nice pile of Wallies for a family that you could show off at any one point.
I don't even know how many Wallies we got anymore. But I know that, I always wanted sons, and I ended up with 4 girls. My oldest, Adra, runs my company, watches all the money I can't even count, right? Not that high, or maybe now that low. But at the end of the day, Ashley runs our TV production company here in Yorba Linda. She got into driving funny cars, won races, chased me for the champions. One year, my wife's still mad about it. I was able to take her out in the last race of the season. And Courtney come along, got in funny cars. She was a social media queen. She's still today, she's not even racing. She's all over the internet. Especially she married IndyCar driver Bobby Rahal's son Graham, and they got a little baby girl, Harlan. Unbelievable. So I'm having grandkids. Life is good. Then Brittany gets in, the only one that didn't go in funny cars. She went in Top Fuel, and she won the championship a few years in. and she's out there right now. I think she's maybe third in the points or a couple points away from it. I'm second in the points right now. Robert's right up there with me, but it's going to be tough. The fight is starting, and the NHRA, great show there in Norwalk we put on.
It's like I look at someone like you, and the movie Gladiator comes to mind. You're a nitro gladiator. Your family are gladiators. You're around the sport. You grind it out and get it done. And I think that's part of what makes you guys such an amazing team, is that you don't go out there and run your mouth. You run your race car and you do battle.
Well, I've run my mouth, and all it ever did was get me in trouble, but you let the race car, when I was born, we talk about the pandemic now with COVID, and I won't get into that, but I was born in 49. And when I started walking around 1 or 2 years old, I got polio, and my cousin was paralyzed with it from the waist down. They didn't have a vaccine, and I ended up getting the vaccine, but my one leg is a little bit smaller, and I played football in high school and college, but I was never great. I could, never run that good. And I was a quarterback. I still hold the record in Bell Gardens High, 9 games a season. We lost every one, 27 games. And so that record still stands in Bell Gardens High School. So, I forgot what you asked, but basically a race car did the running for me. And when it was time to go racing, that's what I did. I still love it, and I'll do it till I drop.
Now, kind of going off of that, like I said, you've been wheeling funny cars for a very long time. And to me, I like asking people that have been racing nitro cars a long time this question. What's it been like for you to watch the sport evolve from the dry hops and, reading bearings to find out what the tune likes, to having a command center and everything now? What's that been like to watch?
Well, understand, I started in 74, do the math. What is that, 40 years? But I was racing before that. So I've been out here, I've seen it all. I wasn't there in the very beginning, but I was, back when NHRA only had 10 races, 11 races. And I watched it evolve, but my heroes were Don, the Snake Prudhomme. I mean, the stuff that I saw, Big Daddy Don Gartlett's, it was unbelievable. And to be a part of it, but it took off, and I was part of that journey. And I had new guys I fought along the way: Ron Capps, Bazemore, Al Hoffman used to kick my car when I went by in the pits. He said one day they painted Elvis on the hood of my car. We did, collector cars, and he said, "Hey, how come they put that picture on there? You don't look by him." So a month looked like him. A month later, they put Frankenstein on the hood of the car, and they said, "Hey," Hoffman says, "they finally put your picture on the hood of the car." That was the world we lived in. Now it's evolved. We got the Robert Heights, the young guys. We got the Hagans. Ron Capps is still a young guy. He's a kid. He's still 25 years younger than me. He's still out there, and he was a kid when I met him. So I think he was looking over the fence at the races. I snuck him in or something. But along the road, it was just a great time. A lot of stories, watching my kids grow up, and now my grandkids, and I hope I can keep them racing. I'm trying to build me right now a marketing team. I hired me a headhunter to put together a team that I'm going to put in Indy that just chases money. I've always had a crew chief, a backup, a car chief. I had everything it took to win, and I always chased the money myself, or with some help from different people, or Robert Height and Kelly Antonelli in Indy. But I'm going to put a team together, because it's getting tougher, to make sure I can stay in business and my grandkids can race if they want to.
And that's, I guess, kind of takes us into an interesting area. Is that something that, if your kids don't, grant you, your family decide that they don't want to drag race, they want to do something else, is that something that you're just going to, be back behind? Because, Jaggie's one relative, they do round around stuff. Or would we see you at a NASCAR track if they're into that?
If my Rahal says my granddaughter, if she's going to drive a race car, it'll be an Indy car, and we'll be there because we go watch Rahal race. And bottom line, I tell the kids this: number one, if you want to get in a sport, in drag racing, especially drag racing, IndyCar, NASCAR, Roundy, whatever it is, Do it because you love it. Don't do it because you want to get rich. Don't do it because you want fame. Don't do it for any of those reasons. Do it because you love it, you love the competition, and you love driving a race car. Because if you do it you're going to learn what you see on Sunday is not the life. It's running through airports, getting on airplanes, like the one that I'm going to tell you about from Australia that almost crashed. John Force almost didn't exist. So anyway, are they leaving? I got a couple folks over there that just from Washington. Oh, okay. I'm back to you, Brian. Okay.
Squirrel. You know, you talked about Al Hoffman kicking your car. You know, over your career, who do you consider your greatest rival, and kind of what created that rivalry and kept it going?
Well, I was beat up by Don Perdome, the Mongoose, Raymond Beadle, Jungle Jim. I was beat up by all of them. And it was just a way of life. Joe Paisano, they all beat me up. And as I was starting to come around and starting to win races, when me and Coil teamed together, I won my first national event in '87 with Austin Coil in Montreal. I got out to do an interview, no Steve Evans, a bunch of drunken, well, a few Canadians that drank too much were down there yelling and screaming and cheering me on. Like a guy finally sent me a video 30 years later of the car racing, and I was racing the Mongoose at that, Ed the Eighth McCullough, another hero of mine. So if I don't see you, love you, thank you. See you later. I root for Seattle. I'll be rooting for you up there. I'm talking to some racer families here. So what I'm saying is there was so many, but when I started to win, Kenny Bernstein was the champion, drove the Batmobiles. I raced him for years, but he went into Top Fuel. Perdome went to Top Fuel. They all went to Top Fuel. And so there was a new breed of guys that were coming up. And that's where the Hoffmans, Bazemore, great racer. We fought all the time, verbally, you know what I'm saying? But it was just an ongoing thing, and it's evolved. Ron Capps in those days. So Perdome and them were the early days, and there was the middle were those guys. And now there's the new batch of people. And, just people I love, Dale Creasy, all these people that are out there that do it because they love it, and they don't do it to make themselves rich. So do it because you love it.
Yeah, I always joke and tell people, if you want to, become a millionaire in drag racing, start out with $1 billion. That's the easiest way to do it.
Good call.
It's like the sport is for those of us that we hate money and free time. It's just, you just get rid of those things quickly, right? Now,
you stunned me there where you were going with that, but go ahead.
Yeah, that's part of the fun. You never quite know where it's going to go now at this point. That's kind of, we're going to get into the fun portion of the show where we're going to get some like almost action reaction questions. Now, we're going to take a scenario here. You can't drive a funny car anymore. What class are you going to race besides a funny car?
No, I'll probably end my retirement in a fuel funny car. That's where I started. And I drove front engine dragsters in the early days, but I never did anything. So I'll end with a funny car.
But if you could race anything else, what would you race? Or you had to, you absolutely had to race something else. What would you go?
I'd go to Top Fuel because of
Fuel?
my daughter's racing in Top Fuel, and I'd like to race her. So kind of simple. IndyCar, NASCAR. At my age, them guys are out there really working it, for 2.5, 3 hours. And I only got to do it for 4 or 5 seconds. And if I get tired, I go back in the trailer and rest. And so I'm still able to do a good job.
Now, it's funny you mentioned racing your daughter. I believe it was you raced Corey McLenithan when we used to race Top Fuel in funny car head to head. Would that be something you'd like to see come back as one of those special races?
Well, he was a great driver. I really had a lot of respect for him. He chased money. He did a little bit of everything. He worked on the car. I don't know if NHRL do that where you can be in multiple classes, but no, I stick with the funny cars.
Okay. Now, this is a question I put on there, and I thought it would be interesting. My wife watched the series The Crown on Netflix where it's got, the King and Queen of England through the decades. Well, we're going to make a movie about your life. And what actors would you want to see play you in the different decades, the 70s, 80s, 90s, and 2000s? As we make the movie about your life, who would have to play John Force in those different decades?
I actually made a list. Now I can't remember it, but I think if you went back, one of my favorite actors in the early days was Clint Eastwood, and still is, but he's too tall, so he couldn't play it. Then there was Tom Cruise, but he's too good looking for me. Gary Busey would probably be me because he's the most crazy, and that's like me. But don't know where he's at in Hollywood, but I'm sure he's there somewhere. Wahlberg, love him because I raced in the early days in New Jersey, in that part of the country, and that's where he's from, East Coast. But I got a beer belly, so I don't think Wahlberg would fit. So I don't know. I'm going to leave it up to whoever makes this movie. We've already got a script. We put it out there in Hollywood. We'll see where it goes.
And that would be an amazing to see that movie because, the show you guys did, Driving Force, I remember like my non-racing friends would be like, do you know who John Force is? Have you seen the show? I'm like, that's only part of what you get to see. What was it like, doing a show and doing that whole deal?
Well, it was hard because a lot of times it got personal, and I'm very much, I say what I want to say off my sleeve, but my kids, there was things that were personal that you don't want to talk about. And it was hard sometimes. Our dog went to the hospital once, and the kids were so emotional. We had to cut the whole show because they wanted to film reality. It ain't, I don't know if it's reality anymore. They started scripting and doing stuff, but we were never, Brent Travers never took us, the producer, never took us down that road. It was what it was. And that's what would get you in trouble. That's why I don't talk religion. I don't do politics. And I just, certain things I don't get into. You know what I mean? I stay with what I know is drag racing. But it was quite a show. Mostly it made me closer to my family. I learned so much about them that I didn't know because I lived on the road, and their mother, Lori, raised them all those years, took care of them. And she's with them every day now. And with me. I don't know why she loves me. She just don't like me.
I think I could deal with that as, it's funny that racers need to really give their racing spouses and significant others a lot of credit because what they have to go through sometimes, I don't think a lot of people understand how insane it really is when you live the life, right?
I could tell you stories, you wouldn't believe it. There was a picture hanging in our old house, and my daughter moved in there. They were going to redo the house, and she took the picture off the wall, and there was a hole in the wall. And when she asked Mom, she said, when Dad used to come in and he won a race and he drank too much, everybody's staying out of school and going to Disneyland tomorrow. And then he come in one day and he was on the phone with the crew chief and he punched a hole through the wall. And she said, I hung a picture over it. And Ashley said, well, why didn't you ever fix the hole in the wall? She said, because every time he got stupid, I took the picture off and said, don't forget that day, how dumb you got. And it was an education to me. So yeah, it was tough coming up through the ranks. Bologna sandwiches, hot milk under the seats of the crew cabs. We just existed. And, excitement when I was sponsored by Wendy's. They had hamburgers, but when Wendy's got a salad bar, it was like everybody on the team was like, oh my God, we can get salads now. That's how crazy it was. There was no money in the early days. We were just young and stupid, and we survived it.
And I think that's part of, I've crewed on friends' cars. And to me, that's part of what makes being part of a drag racing family fun is the journey and the experience, the things you get to do that aren't even part of the race, right? It's the travel to and from where some of the most insane and fun stuff happens, right?
Stories you couldn't tell that I promised sponsors I'll never mention again. But yeah, you lived on the road. We had one year we got in my crew cab, we smelt something burning in the floor. And I know I've drugged this interview out for an hour and I apologize, but my wife's shoes were melting because a hole went in the muffler in my pickup truck, and it burned her shoes, melted to the floorboard. We got out, we didn't know what to do, and it was a Bank of America, which I banked with my whole life, never been in any other bank. And there was a sign on a chain out there, 2 of them, and we took them and we cut them up and wrapped them around the muffler to stop the heat so we could get on to Baton Rouge, right? Well, then we get down there, and Pluger was running my car. This is back, in the 70s. And Pluger said, we need more wing on this car. And we came up with 2 Bank of America signs and bolted them to give us spoiler. And the announcers were saying, he got a deal with Bank of America. And it was just a sign we borrowed.
You know what? It's not stupid if it works, right?
Worked.
Now,
borrowed that sign.
Yeah, acquisition. Acquisition is my favorite word, and you have to do that. You acquisitioned it to achieve a goal.
Yes.
Now, did you want to tell the plane story before we wrap things up?
Yeah, I mean, I'd never been on an airplane, and I'm still afraid of flying, but I fly all the time on a weekly basis. Drove the truck for 25 years, and but now I fly. I jump in with the guys every now and then just to get a road trip. But we left Sydney, and we loaded up on a plane. We were coming home. The tour's over. Had a check for $3,000 is all we had, but we got to see Australia, and I'll be going back there one of these days. They're trying to get me to go back there now, but the plane took off out of Sydney, and it was flying back to the States, but it went through hell, I can't even think of the islands where they stop and they refuel. And we're halfway out, and the captain comes on board and says, we got a little bit of problem. We lost an engine, and we saw it blow. We saw the fire. And he said, we've got to go back. And we're like, what do you mean? And I'm telling you, they started giving us free drinks. Everybody was drinking. That's how they handled it in those days.
Oh,
and they went back and they parked us because they didn't want to land in these islands because they couldn't get the jet up, and we'd be there days to get parts. And it was very scary. We were on the praying to God, don't let me die out here in the middle of nowhere, and don't let me end up in the ocean. I just saw the movie Jaws in 74 or 75. And don't let me die in the ocean and get ate by a great white. But, we went back to Sydney. They put us in a hotel, and next day we flew home. But that was an experience. When we saw that deal, my guy goes, what was that flash? And I said, well, I don't know. And it was a motor. And they put us down. What are the name of the islands? It doesn't matter. But I want to say Fiji, but it wasn't Fiji. Anyway, I don't know where it was. But we made it home, and that was my first time on an airplane. And I haven't had any problems since.
Oof. I'm not afraid of flying. I just hate airports. And the only issue I've ever had is I've been on a plane where they had to make an adjustment, and I hear beating on this plane with a large hammer underneath. And the pilot sounded like the Swedish Chef, and he's telling us everything's okay in that Swedish Chef voice. And I'm thinking, I'm about to die because they're beating on this plane. God knows what. And the last voice I'm going to remember is the Swedish Chef. Not fun.
See?
Well, John, our time here is coming to an end. And I usually tell my guests that they need to channel their inner John Force to thank all their sponsors and tell people where to find them at. But now John Force is my guest on the show. So I'll just let you be you, channel your inner self, and thank all your sponsors and tell people where they can find you at. So the floor is yours, my friend.
This car right here behind me, Herco, Parker Store, Baldwin, all the sponsors that take care of me in the majors. What I really want to do is I want to thank the men and women in the military for their service and what they do to keep this country great. I want to thank the police and fire department for everything, not to get into politics, but what they do to protect us. And I want to thank the first responders, that has helped get us through this pandemic. And I hope it passes, and it looks like it is. So they're the real heroes in my eyes, not us. We do it, we love it. And yeah, we've lost some drivers out here over the years. It does happen. And but I'm going to do this because I love it. I do it because I love to entertain. I want to thank Auto Club. I want to thank Chevrolet, Peak and Blue Def, Old World Industries, Monster and Flavor Pack, Cornwell Tools, all these people that let me go down this road. And Goodyear Tires, I've won every race on Goodyear Tires. So I want to thank all them, all the teams, all the families, everybody. And I want to thank you for letting us on your show. Different deal. I don't usually go an hour. I probably put everybody to sleep. You probably have to break it up 4 times to play it all. But I hope it does you good, because it did me good sitting here telling some of the stories.
John, it was awesome to have you on, man. I appreciate it. Of course, I've got to thank our sponsors, Performance Distributors, Airflow Research, ProCharger, Holley, MSD, Flowmaster, Mosier Engineering, Comp Cams, Fuel Air Spec Technology, and Eldebrock. John, thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule to sit down and have fun for about an hour with us, man. It means a lot to me. I know our fans are going to love hearing the great stories and the cows and the Australian, the whole deal, but thanks again, man. I really appreciate it.
Okay, Brian, thank you for having me on the show. Thank you, everybody.